Hey guys, Tom Barclay here outside the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium after a fantastic win for Spurs, 1-0 over Liverpool in the Carabao Cup semi-final first leg, just what Ange Postecoglou needed. A game full of incident. I think the first place to start off before we get into the good stuff in the game, got to start with Rodrigo Bentancur. 6 minutes in, he has this horrible fall to the ground as he's stooping for a header from a corner, which he doesn't make contact with the ball, and then he hits the floor, and it's kind of unclear exactly what happened to him. I asked Ange Postecoglou at the press conference afterwards what happened to him, and he couldn't be clear on it either. He had 8 minutes of treatment. A word on Pedro Porro, who seemed to react quickest amongst the concerned teammates and opposing players at that particular moment. And it looked like, from pictures we've seen, like he almost sort of fished Rodrigo's tongue out of his mouth as if he it looked like he was knocked out, and to sort of, I guess, prevent him from swallowing his own tongue. So not quite sure if that is exactly what happened, but from what it looked like Porro worked it very, very quickly. Then we had 8 minutes of treatment, the medics sort of seeing to Rodrigo. He eventually came off on a stretcher. It looked like he was being administered oxygen, not for the first time this season. If you remember at Leicester, he had a horrible head collision of clash of heads with I think it was Leicester's Fatou in that game, and he had oxygen in that game as well. Fortunately, after that he was fine, and with this one hopefully it'll be the same. We'll see. I mean, at half time we got an update from Spurs saying that he was conscious, that he was talking, and that he was going to be sent to hospital for further checks, which I presume is where he's at right now as I stand here after about an hour or so after full time. But yeah, that's the place to start off with Bentancur. A real worry about him at first, but Postecoglou afterwards said he didn't really know much more on it, but he hoped he'd be okay. So obviously, fingers crossed for Rodrigo Bentancur after a horrible incident for him at the start of the game. I think that incident had quite an effect on the first half. After that, the atmosphere kind of went a bit flat, and the game went a bit flat for a while. I think people just sort of reacting to that particular incident and letting it sort of process over them. Players seemed to be sort of hanging around, worrying about their teammate for quite a while. But then it started to kick back into gear later on in the game. I have to say, overall, Spurs, who had Maddison and Sarr suspended and had 8 other players out mainly through injury and maybe illness with Forster, handled the game really well. I mean, you've got to remember that Liverpool, who've been imperious all season, yes, they may not look quite at their blistering best today, but they still had a fantastic team out, and this was only the second game this season that they had not scored a goal, and the other one being the one they lost 1-0 at home to Forest back in, I guess it was August or September, when that was a real shock result. Maybe now, looking how Forest have done this season, it might not look quite as much of a shock, but it underlines what a performance it was from Tottenham to keep them out. Bear in mind, you look at how many changes they had in the team, and I think the first mention amongst a bunch of mentions of excellent performances has to go to Antonin Kinsky, the Czech goalkeeper, 21-year-old, only signed on Sunday from Slavia Prague, and a deal worth 12.5 million plus add-ons. Comes in with Spurs, really struggling from a goalkeeper point of view, with Vicario not back, expected back at least to the end of February really at this stage. Forster out ill against Newcastle. Brandon Austin playing his first game for Spurs in about 10 years. He comes in, and the way Ange was speaking about him in the press conference on Tuesday, you got the sense that maybe he might start this game. Reading about him, the sort of confidence he has from big games, even though he's only had half a season really playing at a relatively high level in the Czech league, you got the sense that maybe he might start. The fact that they rushed this transfer through ahead of this game probably was the big indicator, but nonetheless it's still very impressive to start this game and play this kind of performance. He had a clean sheet, first of all, against Liverpool, as I just pointed out, hardly ever happens. He made some really good saves. I'd say the save in stoppage time from Núñez, a really inventive flick from Núñez, who came on for Liverpool, save to turn around the post, was the best of the lot. But it only took about 18 minutes, I think I clocked it out, for him to sort of show his fancy footwork, which is a big part of why he's been signed. I mean, Ange, when he was asked about him in the press conference on Tuesday about his ability with his feet, basically said, yeah, he's good at that, but that's not the only reason we signed him, sort of playing down that it is all about a keeper playing with his feet. But you can make no bones about it. he has been brought in not just because of that, but a key factor is his ability to play with his play out from the back, because that is the way Ange wants to play. We've seen it, given how they've continued to persevere with it, rightly or wrongly, with Forster, who's looked really uncomfortable in that side of the game when he's deputised for Vicario. And you could see it straight away. Like I say, 18 minutes in, there's a ball that comes over, Radu Dragozin leaves it, and which is not helpful really, and it's sort of bouncing dangerously. And then there's Kinsky, who we'd heard from what I'd read about and comments from his former coach about his confidence with the ball, but he basically does almost like a keep you up. He flicks it up in the air over the unrushing Jota who was closing him down, and then calmly catches it. And that sort of sums up his sort of confidence, I suppose, that we could see right from the off. It wasn't like there weren't any hairy moments. In fact, about 3 minutes later, he had this attempted sort of pass out, which basically struck Gray, and he kind of got away with it. But generally, I thought he was composed. He had an air of confidence and assuredness, which has been lacking, and I think it had an impact on the rest of the defence. This defence has been so patched up. Remember, as Ange pointed out afterwards, you've got Jed Spence playing left back, doing really well, but that's not his position. Archie Gray obviously playing centre back when he's not a central defender. Still wondering which position he will be long term, but I don't think it will be centre back, put it that way. And he was performing really well. And just overall, I just thought they were really good, and I did think that came from the confidence that Kinsky brought to the team right from the off. And you've got to say fair play. I mean, at full time, I think he was seen hugging his sister after the game, after what a performance, from a whirlwind few days for him, and a great decision from Ange to throw him right in, because he clearly was ready. From one sort of blonde bombshell of a player in Kinsky to Bergvall, got to go with him. He's the match winner. Lucas Bergvall is a player that was signed by Spurs actually back in January, but didn't come through into the summer. He came with a lot of excitement around him, given he turned down Barcelona. A lot of talk about his ability. If you remember, I interviewed Papi Massar in August, who talked about Bergvall being the most exciting of all the new signings with his ability, and basically tipped him already to be one of the best players in the world. I don't think we saw it in the first few months as he adapted to English football. He had a few nice moments, but not the most convincing performances as well, to be fair. I think in games like Galatasaray, he held on to the ball too much. But over the past month, he's really started to come into his own, given more opportunities. Against Newcastle, he was really good, and fans seemed to be disappointed when he was brought off. But I think that decision, even though they obviously lost that game, was clearly done with a view to this match here, in which he proved to be the match winner. And I thought he was brilliant all game, driving the ball forward. His ability to carry the ball was really, really impressive. And there he was for the finish in the 86th minute, I think it was. A long ball over the top from Porro, which Solanke did brilliantly to sort of charge down and hold off Konate, who's a really powerful defender who come on, was strong, held him off, lovely ball back, and there was Bergvall to finish it past Alisson's near post, raced off to celebrate for his first goal for the club, and one of many, I think, with the way he looked tonight. It was really, really good. Of course, we can't really talk about that goal without the controversy that surrounded it. So Bergvall had been booked earlier in the game for a foul on Diaz. It was a bit of a wild challenge, I thought, even though it was probably minimal contact, and maybe Diaz made the most of it, but anyway, he was booked. So then, when moments before the goal he actually scored, had a situation where he he basically did foul Kostas Tsimikas, brought him down in what, to be honest, looks like a yellow card. Not only a free kick, but a yellow card. But because Liverpool still had the ball, referee Stuart Atwell played on. I think Gravenberch has a shot. And what was interesting is he didn't go back to then give Bergvall a second yellow card. Moments later, he then scores the goal. So, understandably, to be honest, Liverpool were kind of raging after that. Arne Slot on the touchline seemed very unhappy. His assistant, I think, got booked. And afterwards, Virgil van Dijk, the quotes were basically very strong on how he felt he should have been a second yellow. It was a mistake. Slot in his press conference, to be fair, seemed a pretty classy guy. Don't know whether he would still be like that if he was up against it in terms of results, but because everything's been going so well, maybe it's a bit easier to be so calm, or maybe that's just what he's like generally. He seems to come across with a lot of class, and he wasn't making too much of it, but he was very much of the mind that it should have been a second yellow. And on the other hand, on the decision, he said if it was him, he'd feel the same way as Arne Slot, but he was basically making the case over this very long-winded rant about VAR and how people in this country, to be honest, aren't doing enough to sort of preserve the sanctity of football, and how many changes that are coming in with things like ever since VAR has come in. He was basically saying that this is kind of what the rules are. I don't quite understand it, but effectively it's like it shouldn't be a yellow card if players played on. To be honest, I'm even right now, my brain's a little bit scrambled from all the quotes, but I didn't quite get his point on that. But his point was that, according to the rules, how they are, from what he's understanding, whether he agrees with it or not, he thinks it was probably the right call. But either way, after last week's decision, and actually I think this is what Slot mentioned in his own press conference, was he was saying he saw sort of footage of Ange last week against Newcastle in the same sort of hot seat in the press conference room at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, sort of raging about that Joel Linton handball. Similar situation for Slot this time. I think, obviously Spurs had a tough one against Newcastle with the Joel Linton situation. I think it's kind of they've got one here that's gone the other way, I suppose. But on Solanke as well, obviously I thought he was brilliant all round. Again, wonderful performance. He was unlucky. Well, no, not unlucky because he was offside, but he almost thought he put Spurs ahead 8 minutes before Bergvall did, when he finished off what was a really good move. Another ball throw over the top from Porro, a lovely finish, and then he was then deemed offside. And what was interesting about this was the first time in English football, men's football history, that the VAR decision to rule it offside was then announced by Stuart Atwell to the crowd in the stadium, which we haven't seen before, as part of a trial, trying to be more transparent over decisions. I mean, I think both Slot made the point that basically with an offside, it is either offside or not. We all see the lines that are drawn, so for something like that, you probably don't need to have it announced. So it was kind of odd in that sense, but that'd be interesting to see if we see more of that going forward. And in this sort of long-winded rant about VAR, clearly not a big fan of any of these sort of newfangled ideas that have been brought in, and that was kind of a point he made about it. He was also asked, just onto his comments, he was full of praise. Actually, he was full of praise about his 18-year-olds. He said it's probably not been made enough of the fact that he's got two 18-year-olds regularly playing. He was very praiseworthy of Bergvall, but he also had a special mention for Archie Gray, who once again is playing centre-back during his time and did really, really well today. Had an excellent game. I mean, once again, to reiterate the point, Liverpool did not score today, and that hardly ever happens. It's only the second time this season. I thought he was excellent. Salah was very quiet actually today, and players like Jota perhaps looked a little bit not quite up to the peak of their powers, perhaps. But all round, I thought Spurs were excellent. Bear in mind, only 17 days ago, they lost 6-3 against Liverpool, which was 5-1 at one point, and Liverpool absolutely battered them. The way they handled Liverpool's threats was very, very impressive, and showed a lot had changed on that front. And on that front, actually, it was pointed out that maybe Ange had been a bit more pragmatic in his team selection. He sort of smiled at that sort of suggestion and said when it came to his midfield that that had been suggested when he had Basuma, Bentancur and Bergvall in from the off, and he said literally that was the only three midfielders he had to choose from, so that was part of the reason. But it did feel a bit like he was a bit more pragmatic on that side. I think Slot pointed out that in that 6-3 game the possession was pretty even, but on this one it was more like Spurs with I think 40%. I haven't checked those stats, but that was his point, and maybe that did speak to a bit more of a switch up from Tottenham. Something that I think is, if that was the case and that was purposeful, I think that was to be welcomed, really, because that's where, personally, I think they could have helped themselves a little bit more in recent weeks. As I've reiterated many, many times throughout, I don't think, I'm not going to be one who's going to tell Ange Postecoglou how to do things, but personally, if you want my opinion, I feel like you don't have to throw away all your principles over how well you want to play from time to time when you're up against it, particularly from a selection point of view. You can make a few tweaks here and there, and I would argue maybe he did tonight, and it worked. He was actually asked whether he's been a bit more emotional of late. Obviously off the back of that Newcastle game, he was very emotional the other day, just generally, and he sort of smiled at that one as well and basically said, when it's the way things are going, not maybe a bit more emotional than I normally am. The way things have been going, how they have been recently, maybe I am a bit more emotional than I normally am, and it's just because of how much it's hurting, I suppose, and when these results are going the way they are, and how much you can see everyone at the club, not just players, who's mentioning people behind the scenes trying to make this work, have not to get the sort of rewards that he thinks they deserve. It weighs heavy, I suppose. And I just finally, I suppose, just felt like a big win for Ange Postecoglou tonight. You went into it off the back of by his own admission, very poor league form, thinking, how are we going to go? Bear in mind, Liverpool absolutely took them apart 17 days ago, as I said, and to come away with a win and a clean sheet just speaks a lot to what he's trying to do. I reiterate, I see players trying to play for the manager. I see when players come in who are fitting for his style of play, like Kinsky, it's having much more of a chance of being successful. We're obviously only halfway through this tie. I definitely felt going into this game, ahead of the second leg, they needed to take at least one goal advantage. Whether that will be enough for the second leg, given how strong Liverpool can be at home, remains to be seen. But it also should be said that because the second leg is so mysteriously distant from this game, it's not till February the 6th. A lot of players should be back for Tottenham by then. A lot of defenders should be back by then. Based on the way Ange has been talking, all of his centre-backs should be fit by then. So that should make a big difference, really. As should, Richarlison. Not that you probably start him, but he should be, as long as he stays fit and firing. Any new signings from January as well. So that could put them in a good position, and they've helped themselves a lot with an excellent performance, based on some excellent performances from youngsters like Bergvall and Kinsky. A good night for Tottenham all round, and let's hope, as I said from the off, that Bentancur is okay.